Let's look at how to calculate percentages and how they can be used in different applications. First, it's important to understand what a percentage is. A percentage represents a part of a whole. This means we're looking at how much of a whole a specific item or category represents. There are lots of ways that we can use percentages in our everyday lives and in lots of applications. Let's start by looking at the steps that we can use to calculate a percentage. Our first step when we're trying to calculate a percentage, or what the part of a whole is to determine how much is the whole. Our second step is to figure out which part we're interested in. In all situations, we'll have at least two parts that make up our whole. So we need to know which of those two parts is the part of interest. Our third step is to divide the number that represents the part by the total amount of the whole. Our fourth and final step is to move the decimal so that we have a percentage. Let's look at one example of calculating percentage and use these four steps. This example states that you have 164 fruit items and 47 of those items are apples. What percentage of the total number of fruit items are apples? Our first step is to identify what the whole is. In this case, it's 164 fruit items. Our next step is to identify the part that we're interested in. In this case, it's the 47 apples. These 47 apples represent a part of the 164 total apples. Step 3 is to divide the part by the whole. So in this case, 47 divided by 164. This gives us a decimal of 0.2865. Step number 4 is then to move the decimal so we have a percentage. In all of these situations, we will move the decimal 2 places to the right. So this gives us a percentage of 28.6%. So in this situation, the apples represent 28.65% of all of the fruit items that we have. Let's look at one more scenario that's a little bit more complex. Let's imagine that we have a large container that has 10,300 red marbles in it and 6,400 blue marbles. And we want to know what percentage of all of the marbles are blue. Let's go through each of our 4 steps with this example. Step 1 is, what is the whole? In this situation, we are not given the whole amount. We are only given 2 parts of that whole amount. So we must calculate or figure out what this whole part is. We know that the container has just the red and the blue marbles inside of it. So we must calculate the whole number, or the total number of marbles in that container. We do this by adding the 2 parts together. So we will add 10,300 red marbles plus 6,400 blue marbles to determine how many marbles are in the whole. This gives us a whole value of 16,700 marbles. Our next step is to determine which part we are interested in. Again, we were given 2 parts, the number of red marbles and the number of blue marbles. In this case, the part of interest is the blue marbles. There were 6,400 blue marbles. Our third step is to divide the part by the whole. So we will take 6,400 divided by 16,700. This gives us a decimal of 0.3832. Our fourth and final step is to move our decimal 2 places to the right. This gives us a percentage of 38.32% of all of our marbles are blue. In some situations, we will be given a percentage and need to know what number that percentage represents of our whole. Let's look at the steps for calculating this type of percentage problem. Our first step is to know the numbers. What is the percentage and what is the whole? Or what are the total number of items that we're concerned about? Step 2 is to move to a decimal. We are given a percentage and we need to move that or change that into a decimal. Our third and final step in this type of percentage problem is to multiply the whole by the decimal. Let's look at one example that has a specific scientific application. When we are doing radiometric dating or absolute rock dating, we often use percentages of numbers of atoms in a rock sample to determine how old that rock is by how many half-lives it's gone through. Let's say, for an example, that a rock sample has 1,230,000 atoms in it, and 46% of those atoms are uranium-238. And we need to know how many uranium-238 atoms are in that sample. Let's go through our 3 steps of figuring out how a percentage relates to a number of atoms. Our first step is to know the numbers. We know that there are 1,230,000 atoms in this rock sample, and we know that 46% of them are uranium-238 atoms. Step number 2 is to move our percentage into a decimal. Now when we move from a decimal to a percentage, we move the decimal 2 places to the right. Now this is opposite. We're moving from a percentage to a decimal. So we will move the decimal place 2 places to the left. So our 46% becomes a decimal of 0.46 when we move that decimal place 2 places to the left. Our third and final step is to multiply the decimal by the whole number, or the total number of objects we're talking about. So in this case, we're going to take 0.46 and multiply it by the 1,230,000 total atoms that we have in our rock sample. This gives us a value of 565,800 uranium-238 atoms in our rock sample. This means that of the 1,230,000 atoms in our rock sample, 565,800 of them are uranium-238, and all the rest are some other atom type.